corridors of Nigeria's National Assembly, the legislative role in enhanced electoral reform stands as a beacon of democratic evolution. As the nation's primary legislative body, the National Assembly is pivotal in crafting and amending electoral laws that shape the very foundation of Nigeria's democratic process. Through meticulous debates and comprehensive review, legislators are tasked with the refining electoral policies to booster transparency, fairness, and inclusivity in the electoral system. This mandate of ensuring reforms and amendments in the electoral system is vested on the National Assembly by Section 4 of the 1999 Constitution, and today our discussion will focus on the legislative processes involved in electoral reforms in Nigeria. I am Nta News24. Welcome to Electoral Reform Half Hour on Nta News24. This program is brought to you by the Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa, PACA, with support from the MacArthur Foundation. We are honored to have Ambassador Chibuzo Okereke with us today. He is a renowned legislative governance expert and policy analyst, currently serving as the president of EGAF Africa, with a deep focus on governance and legislative processes. Chibuzo Okereke contributed significantly to policy discussions and reforms across platforms, and his expertise leadership in EGAF underscores his commitment to enhancing governance structures in Nigeria and beyond. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Chibuzo.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
Is it possible you walk us through, the process for initiating and passing electoral reforms, especially laws in the Nigerian National Assembly?
Well, thank you very much for that question. That is actually very important and the core at what the legislature does. In terms of the processes for passing electoral bills or any bill at all, the processes apart from money bill are just the same as prescribed both by the Constitution and the standing orders of the National Assembly. The first stage is actually at the conceptual stage, identifying a need or a problem by which you want to legislate and cure that problem or provide for that need. So that conceptual stage is very critical. It involves a lot of research. It involves a lot of thinking through what actually do you want to address. Using electoral governance, for instance, do you want to address issue of independence of INEC, financing, voting process, or what have you? Now we already have the Electoral Act 2022, which was the repeal and reenactment from the 2010 that we had. So after that first stage, in our own process, we adopt the 3-reading model. In other climes, there are other models that exist. That process now gets the sponsor. And in terms of sponsorship, there are 3 major gateways. One is either it's an executive bill that coming from the executive arm of government, or that is a private member bill that is coming from the private sector, civil society, but under the rules of the National Assembly, you pass it through the committee or a member that will present it. Then you have the member bill, which is where a legislator himself conceives that bill and presents it. Now that goes to first the Committee on Rules and Business. Now the Committee on Rules and Business is one of the special committees of the National Assembly that is charged with the responsibility of profiling, and scrutinizing proposed legislation before they are gazetted and introduced in the floor of the Senate. They will assign a bill number to it, and And the bill, of course, would have provided for specific section you want to amend or delete or, repeal or whatever is the intention of that proposal. So it goes to, once it goes through that stage, it's gazetted and is read the first time. When the bill is read the first time, it's just the long title of the bill is read in the floor of whichever chamber that is sponsoring it, and there will be no debate in line with the rules of debate. Then the bill, once it's announced with the bill number, that actually signifies the formal introduction within the parliament. Now, it is meant for parliamentarians and the public to begin to take interest once that long title of that proposed legislation, whether establishment bill or amendment bill, is done. Then the next stage is for the bill to be listed for second reading. And the second reading of the bill focuses on the debate on the general merit or demerit of whatever proposal that is beyond. At that point, whoever is the sponsor, if it's executive bill, then the leader of the House or Senate will lead the debate. If it's a private member bill or member bill, the member sponsoring it will be the one to lead debate. So debate, legislative argument is prepared to lead, support on that bill. Then members will get opportunity to also contribute. And that is critical because at that time it's expected that all members who want to contribute either for or against take interest and debate on the bill.
I wanted you to exhaust this because of the very technical nature of it. But I want you to include the major stakeholders. Who are the major stakeholders in this whole process? I know you've talked about the electoral bill coming from the executive or from private member bill. Can you who are the major stakeholders?
Now, the critical stakeholders here include the civil society, who could be advocating, the legislators themselves. You also have, the political parties, you have the legislators, and then even development partners sometimes take interest in electoral reform. You even have community or citizens-led group and the private sector taking interest in pushing. However, it is at that point of second reading that when the bill passes through, it now goes to the committee stage where critical stakeholders now get involved and experts in terms of contributing ideas on whether that bill should be returned as proposed or otherwise. But there is another major, when the bill is reported out of committee back to the House, there is another critical stage, which is the acceptance or debate on the adoption of report from that committee. Because in this whole process, at the second stage and the reporting stage are the two major stages where critical amendment, even amendment for what citizens are proposed. And this is why stakeholders and civil society must be watchful, because at the time of consideration of reports, you discover that the clause-by-clause consideration are done and adopted, and anything can be changed at that time. Mostly is done towards the end of plenary. At that time, most legislators have even left the plenary, and so it's critical to watch out for such things. When that stage is done, then the bill passes for third reading, and in line with section 58 of the Constitution, a clean copy is transmitted to the president if concurrence have occurred between the two chambers, and then the bill can receive assent or not from the president.
From the president. Yeah. Excellent. There are recent electoral bills, that are in the National Assembly. The issues around early voting, the issues of election in one day, the issue about transmitting of results. These bills, could you discuss their impact and see what these changes, what will be the significance if they are eventually passed?
Well, from where we are coming from to now, I would say that we have made incremental progress, though in a piecemeal measure. We are coming from a situation where we couldn't even do accreditation. Our ballot boxes were being carted away to the 2010 Electoral Act amendment that introduced the card reader, that tried to, reform the process of accreditation. Unfortunately, we couldn't sustain that. Then we saw another improvement with the 2022, where we now have the BVAS introduced, where we have continuous voter registration. So this has had, some kind of impact, especially with the way which now moved from the issue of burning and killing a lot of people to vote by him. In the past, nobody talks about vote by him because there is no voter existing. The political actors were the voters. So this, we have made incremental progress with that. But there are still critical issues, like the issue of this electronic transmission. And that's why I get worried, because there's something we call subsidiary legislation or delegated legislation, and which is contained in the principal act of the Electoral Act. But we have seen in the electoral jurisprudence that the court seemed to see INEC regulation to be a weak legislation that is not substantive. And that is worrying, because if the court had since 2011 upheld the issue of card reader and as part of laws, because it is not INEC that decided to issue regulation. The Constitution confers with the power to do so. So whatever regulation they have made pursuant to the principal act is part of law. So I expected our electoral jurisprudence to recognize that. By that time, the politician would have taken note that you cannot play with the powers of INEC. So issue of independence is a question. I look at Section 3 of the Electoral Act on the establishment of the INEC fund. You will see a clear mischief in that provision, whereby the provision established a fund without any statutory allocation of that fund. And when it prescribes where the fund will come from, it says from federal government. INEC is a national body, with national commissioners appointed in line with the Federal Character Commission, Character Commission, Act, that has everybody from every zone there. Now, so if you say federal government funds INEC and the states are happy, I laugh at that, because you have actually ceded your power to contribute to electoral governance to federal government. So it's supposed to come from consolidated revenue fund, a certain percentage. That's how you guarantee independence, because we have the ecological fund, is from CDF. We have other funds established that are coming from the CDF. So you can't have INEC own and you say federal government. And then you go and talk about, other pros. So I think that is where we have the issue. And the issue of releasing money 1 year. You can't do effective procurement. You can't overcome inflationary constraints in 1 year. So you need to expand that.
We're going to go on a short break, Chibuzo. But when we come back, you're going to be talking about the challenges in the milling of these laws, the bills. What are those challenges that is encountered when bills are being processed, and how can we mitigate those challenges? We'll go on a very short break. When we return, Electoral Half Hour will be back.
The electorates, internal democracy, credible process, independent umpire, security, and the rule of law. These are the catalysts that propel free, fair, and credible elections. Join us every Saturday at 8:30 p.m. on NTA News 24 as we x-ray, dissect, and analyze the various components of electioneering and the prospects of democratic consolidation in Nigeria. Electoral Reforms Half Hour, brought to you by Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa, PACA, in conjunction with NTA News 24 and support from MacArthur Foundation. Keep a date with us every Saturday at 8:30 p.m. and repeat broadcast Sunday at 2:30 p.m. on our various platforms. Don't miss it.
Glad to have you back. We're still speaking with Ambassador Chibuzo Okereke, the president of EDGAF Africa. I was talking about the challenges that are involved in the milling of electoral bills and how we can mitigate that. And I know that you have very vast understanding of this area. You know, the last time I was having a conversation with you, you brought up some very deep issues about the weaknesses in how these laws are. Is it possible that you put us through?
Well, you know, the National Assembly is a political arena, and the assembly members come from different political parties. And there's this idea of we versus them. And we have seen also that part of the challenge is that the citizens are not taking interest in the role of their own lawmaker in electoral governance framework. Because if you make it an election priority, that this is part of what we are going to use to rate you, how you help to craft effective electoral governance, then the person begin to take it more serious. So it's still an elite situation that we are faced. So in the process, for instance, you see that lawmakers abandon political parties. It is now how they survive. The most important thing for a lawmaker is to win re-election. And the electoral governance framework is critical for that. And that's why you could see issue of electronic transmission being hanged. You know, they didn't quite, they were not emphatic on the provision. And they left it.
There's electronic transmission, because what you have is upload now. Not, that upload is transmitted, so it can be called transmission. But what with the challenge is in the collation. Electronic collation. You know, but my challenge is that there are so many support systems for the National Assembly. You have news, you have this, you have that. How much does all of that impact?
No, yeah, the electoral governance framework itself, like electoral bill, is a political bill. It's not like an economic bill or infrastructure bill. This is something that has direct implication on the ability of the lawmaker to return, or otherwise, even the executive. You saw what happened with the 2019 effort, where even a parliamentary progressive network was formed within the assembly that caused problem in the Senate just over reordering the election sequence. So that is the kind of challenge you face, and that mitigating against this type of issue require that lawmakers should live above self, and then the civil society group active citizenship is very critical. For instance, the issue, you know, the constitution is only where you see voting. Under the rules, things like an electoral bill or whatever bill being proposed is voice vote. You used to pass it, right? And when that is the case, you discover that during the, like I highlighted earlier, during the clause by clause consideration at a report stage, when the committee are reported, most times it's done towards the close of plenary. Many members are gone for committee meeting or oversight. In any case, you may not even have, you know, adequate number of people there, and you see the presiding officer saying clause 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't even say I carried. Now you are meant at that clause by clause to look at the wordings of each clause and say, I observe something that has differed from the committee report.
I think that came up in the amendment of 2022. Yeah. Especially the issue of primaries, you know, party primaries. A lot of the lawmakers did not know what was passed in that 2022. Yeah, but that brings me to how civil society and the public can impact these laws, especially now with insecurity and what public hearing has become. You are embedded in this process. How can we get civil society and private, you know, public to participate much more in, especially these electoral bills, other than these choreographed town halls and organized public hearing, if you like?
So people have to know. I see even from the civil society some kind of bias in terms of certain provision. They seem to be interested in operations I think in terms of institution, they have to look at empowering INEC and the institution itself. If you are biased, you are focusing on operation, what does a returning officer do, presiding officer, and what have you, we are getting it. So we have to be interested, as far as law is concerned, when it gets to the judiciary, they will interpret even a full stop and a comma in a law. So we have to be interested. Adequate research needs to be done. Like I've highlighted a mischief in Section 3 that didn't actually guarantee any fund for INEC. This is the kind of way laws are framed to make the INEC that's supposed to be independent to be dependent, because whoever, whether you're on first line charge, you get money at the, once you don't have statutory flow tied to the CDF, you cannot operate, effectively.
So looking ahead, what are those legislative reforms that you think should be prioritized? And then in closing, what are those final message you advise you have, you can share with Nigerians so that they can be more active in this legislative process?
So for me, I think that it's critical that we cannot legislate our way into electoral credibility. Legislation is actually the last solution. We have to believe in the power of INEC in regulations. For instance, I sincerely believe at least 3% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund should be instituted within that fund account, so that every year that fund goes there, because INEC does a lot of work among the few institutions that have offices from national, federal level to the local government level, provided by the Constitution itself. So this is a massive responsibility that shouldn't depend on. So that is critical to address. Also, I think that under the law, INEC shouldn't prescribe the qualification for their secretary. I've studied the responsibility of that secretary is very serious. So the qualification should be open and written in the law that this is what the secretary of INEC should have as qualification before it's appointed. Then, in terms of citizens, just like your Bible and your Quran, the electoral governance framework, the law, is very central. Now, the political leaders govern on the electoral mandate of the people. The electoral mandate of the people is a product of the electoral governance framework, which is that law. You need to know that law so that you can even understand a situation where core members are posted as presiding officers and different people work corpus uniform to appear as presiding officer. You're able to deal with
Absolutely.
It at the
level.
So
have Chibuzo and exhaust this. I wish that we have more time, but this is where we draw the curtain on this episode of Electoral Reform Half Hour. And we wish to specially thank Ambassador Chibuzo Kereke, President EGA, for your time and contribution on the program. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
So thank you so very much. Electoral Reform Half Hour is brought to you by the Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with sponsorship from MacArthur Foundation. We are live every Saturday from 8:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. with a repeat broadcast every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. same station. You can contact us on our social media handles showing on your TV screen. Thank you for watching. I am Ezenwa Wagu. Have a good evening.